Hello and welcome to episode number 245. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. This is a premium episode. It was recorded especially for all of you premium subscribers. Thank you very much for your support. The Gower Handbook of People in Project Management has over 60 chapters. We've already looked at 3 of them in our last interview, and today we welcome back Lindsay Scott to discuss 3 more. The handbook looks at the people issues that are specific to different sectors of organization, like public, private, and the third sector. The organization of people in projects, both real and virtual, the relationships between people, like their roles and the project environment, as well as the human behaviors and skills that are associated with working collaboratively. In our interview right now, we will focus on project management certifications, hero project managers, and a day in the life of a project manager. As always, our main goal is to give you insights and recommendations that you can hopefully apply on your projects or on your career right away. And now, please enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with Lindsay Scott, Director of RS People.
Hello, Lindsay. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me again.
So you have selected 3 more chapters from your book, the Gower Handbook of People in Project Management. You told us in the first interview that you've had 51 contributors to this book. So that must have been a big challenge in regards to keeping people on track with their deadlines. How did you approach this? How did you get people to actually sit down and write their chapters and give them to you on time?
Okay, well, I hope you are going to... I didn't use a Gantt chart or anything like that, as much as I should have done. But the interesting thing about this is that if anybody ever says to you that if you really want to try and manage over 51 project practitioners, don't. I've always loved the name of that podcast, Herding Cats, but that's exactly what it was like. They are, some of them are great, some of them are absolutely terrible, and they know who they are, but that's fine. You know, as long as they're great project managers, that's all that matters. But when it comes to certain projects in their life, like putting together a chapter for this book, and to be fair, some of the people that have contributed to this book have never written formally before, and I think some of them found it were a challenge, and but they eventually got there.
Right. Okay, so the 3 chapters that you have chosen are Chapter 60, Project Management Certification, Chapter 57, the Hero Project Managers, is how I started out, and then Chapter 30, about managing daily routines. So, let's get going. First one, Project Management Certification, taking charge locally. What is that one all about?
I picked these next 3 because they represent the book's quite eclectic. There's going to be stuff in there that you're going to expect to see and should see, quite rightly so. But there are some things that are in that book that are about giving food for thought. And this is definitely one of those chapters. But essentially what this chapter is about is about project managers taking charge of their own development based on, for example, maybe their own sector or the domain that they work within, rather than following a one-size-fits-all, which you can see from professional associations and stuff around the world. So this is a chapter that was, when I first got it, I thought, wow, okay, there's probably some contentious stuff in there, but, this is what our profession's all about. It's still growing, it's maturing, and, it's, for me, it's about project managers have to take more of an interest in their own development and also the profession, really. And this chapter certainly puts some stuff down on the line that makes you think.
One discussion is always the question of, does certification help your competence? And Michael Greer does talk about that. in his chapter 60 here. What's his take?
His take actually is by a story, which, I love stories. I love reading. So actually, when he's talking about the difference between competence and certification, ultimately it boils down to that the competence is that you have the skills and the abilities to do the job, and do you really need an external body to validate that? That's the gist of it. And in some respects, some of the things that I agree with what he talks about, but in others, necessarily, I don't necessarily agree with him totally either. So, yes, again, this is why I think it comes down to the most important bit for me is developing competencies in project management, regardless of where that comes from. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. He also talks about how certifications are created and sold. And I guess that's the part where you mentioned, that could be a bit controversial.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. What does he tell us? How are they created and sold?
Well, it does actually go into some detail about it gives a part of a chapter of 10 steps used by professional associations for creating a certification framework. And I don't know if it's kind of like trying to blow the lid on something, but I think it gives a clear account of how do they go about coming up with a certification and assessing somebody's competence. I don't want to go into too much detail with it, to be honest, because it is more of a checklist. But essentially, what he does when he moves on from that is like saying, okay, so these are the 10 steps that you need to get and create a certification. Ben goes on to say, well, actually, they do other things by how do they validate that, how do they market that. So yes, there's there's a very contentious bit in there. However, he does go on to talk about something which I think is really interesting, and maybe food for thought for project practitioners that are out there. How about if you actually sat down and created your own certification? So the Joe Bloggs PM certification, which is based on your own career, because as we know, project management and project managers' roles differ throughout organisations throughout the world. So it's an interesting concept that you could be developing your own certification. And that's the bit that I liked about this particular chapter, is that I'd never really thought of that before. And it does go in to do some practical ways on how you could actually do that.
So we actually have a checklist in there for everybody to create their own project management certification and start selling it and offering it.
Well, not necessarily. I think yeah, okay. I think it's more to do with the bit that I took away from that is that at the moment, what I see in my day-to-day job is I don't think that project managers are taking too much of a active or proactive involvement in the development of the profession and of their own career. And it's particularly interesting that when it comes to things like talking to them about their options, when it's training, assessment, certification, but actually many of them are still not totally aware of what options they've actually got. And I think this chapter, yes, there's some bits in there that, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but essentially the takeaway for me is that this is about looking at your development a lot more closely and a lot more seriously. It's almost like putting the discussion out there and it's on the table. It's the opening gambit. As project professionals, how do we make sure that we are developing the right way for me as an individual rather than for a mass collective of project managers across the globe?
Should you certify yourself? What does he say about that?
Good question. Michael's idea about this, should you, be getting the, certifications and what have you, is no, in a nutshell, easy answer, because he believes that you should be focusing on the core competencies that underlie the certifications that you get. And I think, for him, it's the professional tools and materials that are important, getting good guidance in terms of good information and good teaching, and then practice. And he doesn't believe that, you you need a certification to have those behaviours, drive those behaviours.
All right, I'm just surfing over to LinkedIn and I'm looking at his profile here just to see if, he drinks his own Kool-Aid, so to speak, and it looks like he is actually not certified. I like that. Somebody who's actually doing what he says we should be doing as well.
Well,
all right.
There's one more thing there. I think, he says that you don't need anybody's blessing, that you have enough skill to do the job.
Right.
Interesting point.
Yep, absolutely. What is your conclusion from this chapter? What's your takeaway? Other than, be more proactive in your own career for our listeners.
I think the practical takeaway for this is that are you aware of the key competencies of a project manager? Again, this is something that I come across quite a lot of the time when I'm talking to people about maybe competency assessment, skills gap analysis, that kind of thing. And actually, when you ask the question, are you clear as a project manager what the core competencies are within project management? And perhaps you're not aware of that, or maybe you are and you've forgotten. I think it's time to have another look because, again, it fits in perfectly with development and career development needs. How do you know what you need to improve on if you're not aware of some of the gaps that you might have in the competencies?
And from here, we're moving on to Chapter 57, The Hero Project Managers. What is that chapter all about?
I came up with this idea because I was previously, before I started the business that I'm doing now, used to work for a large American corporation. And they used to have these project managers all the time. And essentially, when a project is going wrong, they would parachute in this superb, wonderful hero project manager, a troubleshooter that is going to turn that project around, get it back on track. And, I think a lot of people will probably recognise that kind of project manager. Luckily for us, we've got Andy Jordan to write that, and he's written a brilliant chapter about, if you're looking at hero project managers, it's, well, how do projects deteriorate so much that requires them in the first place? He's also looked at, well, what is a good hero project manager? But crucially, he's also talked about, well, what organisations can do to make sure that we don't need them in the future. A pretty rounded chapter, and lived it.
So what are the factors that lead to the need for these hero project managers?
Oh, where do you start? I'm sure everybody, if we look at the list of why projects fail, you kind of got, your answer's probably going to be in there somewhere. But, for Andy's take on it, it's either, he's got it down to 3, bad planning, bad project management, or bad stakeholder sponsor leadership. That's what he went with, which, pretty much covers it all, really, I would say, especially if you just say bad project management, because that could be a whole host of different things, couldn't it? But, these are the serious things that he pinpointed as to why projects go bad.
Yeah, following that discussion, he jumps into a more detailed description of a typical hero project manager and the job requirements. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting take on this, because I think it's a given that a hero project manager knows how to manage normal projects, the ones that are just generally not that risky or complex. So you're making the assumption that somebody's experienced. So then when you're parachuted into a problem project, actually a lot of the things that you are then doing are very behavioural. So you're looking at things like, you're going to have a lot of people around you that are going to be really annoyed that their project is failing. So it's, how do you start to build relationships with people that are ultimately, are going to be pretty annoyed that their work's not been going very well. So there's a heavy emphasis on how you can build relationships, not only with your project team, but also then, with the surrounding people. He talks a bit about, the ability to analyse, what is the status that we're at now? What do we need to get to? And being very clear, very decisive. He talks very much about you have to be a decisive person. One that is able to handle risk, because ultimately that's what you're going to be facing with a project that's been going out of control or is failing in some way. So, it's very much about the, the relationship side of stuff, the risk side of things. But also, I think from if you imagine the hero project manager, they do tend to have, quite strong leadership, quite a bit of gravitas, very, people want to feel like they're now in the right hands. So, yeah, very much the behavioural side of a manager.
And then, of course, we want to get rid of these hero project managers because, we're all project managers and we can do our own job. So how do we eliminate hero project managers? I guess it has a lot to do with the factors that lead up to the need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things that Andy pinpoints on this is that he talks about that hero project managers are bad for projects in general, because it's almost saying that it's not serious to have a project that has completely lost its way because somebody's always going to be able to be called in and rescue it. Yeah, he talks about hero project managers being bad for project managers as well, because it kind of removes the pressure to perform well if you know that somebody else is going to be able to step in at some point and take that away from you. The other thing is that he talks about it being bad for organisations, and I think this is what if you look at those reasons that lead up to why they're being failures. Here's a great quote that I pulled out because I particularly like this view. He said, "Heroic project management is a trade-off, sacrificing the long-term health of the resource pool for the sake of progress on a specific initiative." And I think that's a really interesting view on this, in that an organisation has to pull itself together for the sake of the people that it employs to work on projects. It's totally unacceptable not to look at some of those reasons why projects fail. And if there are things like methods and process and things that can be fixed and focused on, they should be, rather than thinking that we can have these people that are going to be able to step in and sort it all out. Because the final one that Andy comes up with is saying, well, hero project managers are bad for hero PMs themselves, because ultimately that person cannot carry on doing that job day in, day out, because they're extremely stressful situations. They really can't be sustained.
All right. And what is your personal takeaway from the Hero Project Managers chapters? What have you taken over into your own projects?
This chapter really highlighted something to me that might not to other people, I'm not sure. But again, it emphasized the importance of PMO, a program management office, portfolio office, whatever you want to call it. Because actually, if you look at some of the reasons why a project fails, if it's bad planning, if it's bad project management, if it's bad stakeholder and sponsorships, things like that, actually a good PMO can start to address some of these problems and start to make some changes within an organisation. PMOs, is my subject area. I love it, and I loved the connection between, hero project managers, projects going wrong, but actually there is a mechanism in place, and a lot of organisations have probably already got that mechanism. But I think this is a shout out to the PMO people to say, it's about time we started stepping up and showing organisations the links between the value of PMOs and how that affects project success versus project failure.
We are moving on to Chapter 30, Managing Daily Routines, a day in the life of a project manager, written by Sam Barnes. What's the overall gist of this chapter? When I look at it, it's sort of almost like a story of what we do day in, day out. Is that right?
It is, yeah. And I've never really seen this written down before, to be honest. I speak to a lot of people that are getting into project management or just looking to step up in their career. And you don't often get an insight into, well, what is the project manager's job? What do they actually do day to day? And I think this is a great chapter. I'd love to take this chapter and give it to every 14, 15-year-old person out there and say, if you're thinking about a career, you'd love this one, because read this chapter and it gives you some great insight into literally what the whole day can be like. And the great thing about Sam is written this in some parts. It's fun to read, but he's also got some practical stuff there as well.
So what does he say in his story? What does a project manager do in a day? Well, obviously starts out with a cup of coffee or tea in the morning, but then what's next?
He talks about, I suppose the best layout of this is that Sam actually comes from a digital web type background. So the way that he's put together this chapter, he is talking about all the projects that he is managing. So therefore you're getting a good sense of when he comes in the morning, he may be having project review catch-up meetings with his various teams because he's working and managing various projects. And then throughout the day, he's talking about some of his projects being at different stages. So, for example, when he talks about getting there in the morning, one of the very first things that he does is talks to his team. But he also gives some practical advice about how he's going to manage his time during that day. And, the practical thing that I really enjoyed reading about, I didn't know about this, which was a technique from somebody called David Allen, called Getting Things Done. This is how you manage your email. And I thought, well, sometimes we forget that our day-to-day job as managers of any description does include being able to keep on top of the day-to-day things like email. So actually, that's been there. But again, going through the various parts of his day, he's got some projects that are kicking off. So he talks about some of his kick-off meetings, how he likes to plan for them, what happens during them, how he keeps them on track. He's also got some projects that are closing down and are ready to go live. So he also talks about how he's going to get ready for a launch, how he gets his team ready, how he keeps people all on track, how he actually stops people from going to lunch until they've done their job, which is, he's got a real good sense of how hectic sometimes the days are, and he's kind of put all that into one chapter. And I think a lot of project practitioners will read that and think, yeah, I totally understand where he's coming from, but I like the fact that he's probably giving me a few little nuggets here and there that I think, I might try that next time.
One thing he talks about are to-do lists. How do to-do lists get involved in his chapter?
Yeah, it's again, coming back to the thing that I said about the GTD, which is getting things done, which is actually a method that anybody can take a look at online. But he actually gives takes a break out to say, this is the way that I do it. He's quite ruthless. He's one of these guys that needs to have a zero inbox, which, hats off to him. Great. But he talks about his to-do list being broken down into 3 different categories. He talks about if an email comes in, if it can be dealt with within 2 minutes, deal with it. If it can't, it gets put onto a list called next action. So sometime when he's got some time, he will deal with it then. He's got a list for where he's sent some stuff out. So if the documents that have gone out for approval or review, that action will be that he's waiting for. I'm waiting for somebody to actively come back. And then he's got the third one, categorization, where it's kind of like, I'll deal with that someday. It's not important right now. It's not really important. It doesn't really have a deadline. So it's an interesting take. I mean, hats off to him, but I did try it after I read this chapter, and it's not for me, but it might be for the project managers.
Yeah, we just recently had Brian Fee on the program who talked to us about getting things done and how it had actually helped him to improve his own productivity on his project. So that's a nice connect there. So what are the big nuggets that you have personally taken away from this chapter here, Day in the Life of a Project Manager? I
think, Sam talks about just the various things that you wouldn't even really think about in the day-to-day thing, which is, when he's having to give status report updates to his boss, and about how he uses that time to not only get, obviously, there's FaceTime. When he's got that FaceTime, how he can quickly get things ticked off his to-do list while he's got that time there. And I think that to me just is talking about how I think that the getting things done philosophy he's got, actually you can start to see it working throughout his day. And I know from speaking to Sam, but also, from the book as well, but he felt that he had to do this because he's managing so many different projects that are at different parts of the life cycle. And this is the only way that he can keep on top of it, or his own sanity, as he says, because otherwise he'd just go, completely off the rails. But he also, one of the other nuggets, I suppose, is what he classes as having time through the day, whether it be 30 minutes here and there. And he talks about all the things that he's got to do within that 30 minutes. Again, that highlights that if you're planning and organising, which, the project practitioners here, you should be able to plan and organise but your time as well as the project. And you can see that going through. But again, the other bits that I liked about this chapter were probably some of the interactive stuff that he's doing with his team. And it's that recognition that, just because as a project manager, you've got a lot of other things going on, which is, different projects and different people all over the place, just how important it is that you are scheduling time throughout that day just to make sure that you're going and dropping by and saying, hi, how are things going? And, it's common sense, but I think sometimes we just get wrapped up in projects that are just totally busy, or we're firefighting, or, they're going off track, that sometimes we forget, the human bits of it, which is, just checking that people are okay.
I've mentioned it before, the book is 850 pages thick. It has 63 chapters, and in our 2 interviews now, we've managed to look at 6 of these. So it's really a very eclectic collection of various topics. I mean, managing social communications is here. We have managing the people, neuro-linguistic programming is one, cross-cultural relationships another. We have international projects. So there is a ton of good information, probably for everybody, something for everybody's in there. How do you suggest that our listeners would use this book?
I think it's interesting because I've had that various friends and colleagues, and they've asking me that question. And I think it's not a book that you're going to read cover to cover. You're going to look at the contents, and there's going to be some things that are resonating with you because you've had something happen to you recently, or you're going through something at the moment. So those are what I would call a more traditional elements of people in project management. For example, managing conflict, influencing, those kind of things. And then you'll take a look at some of the other things in here and say, actually, I'm not quite sure how that works with project management. So the intrigue will be there. So you'll probably dip in and out of chapters. Some bits you might miss altogether because you're feeling pretty up on that. But I think, well, actually, each author is bringing a slightly different angle because it's based on their own experiences and their own careers. This is not a book that's full of academic, theoretical stuff. This is people that have been out there, that have been doing these project management roles for a number of years, and basically they're sharing their stories, and also each chapter has the practical element to it as well. So, it's a book to savour. It's going to be a one that you'll proudly have on your desk and look at from time to time.
The book is called Gower, Handbook of People in Project Management. It has 51 authors. It was edited by Dennis Locke and Lindsay Scott. It's 850 pages thick and published by Gower Publishing. Lindsay, thank you so much for having been on the program a second time and talked to us about these additional 3 chapters.
Thank you very much.
And there you have it. 3 more chapters from the Gower Handbook of People in Project Management with Lindsay Scott. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP or PMI ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcasts, the PM Prepcast or the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And when you write, please do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this, a quote by Norman Vincent Peale. It's a fact that you project what you are. Until next time.